What a time to be alive. What's up everyone, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and today I'm going to talk about the FiiO KB3 and the version that I'm covering. The reason why I am excited about this is it has a headphone amp built into it. It has a 3.5 and a 4.4 Pentacon right on the side of the keyboard. So naturally, being an audio guy and someone who's reviewed keyboards in the past, this seemed to be like one of the perfect things to cover as far as a crossover between both categories go. This was sent to me for review by FiiO. Won't affect what I say about it. I have some other FiiO products that I'll be talking about in this video and also down the road, because I'll do dedicated videos for the headphones. If you want to purchase this, I'll have several links in the description below, at least at the time of filming this. That's the plan. That'll take you to the AliExpress store, which gets it from FiiO Direct. I also have apos.audio. I've worked with them in the past. Purchasing through them will support the channel, but you can purchase it again wherever you want. And then I will have a generic Amazon affiliate link so you can kind of purchase it where you think makes the most sense for you. So $150, and that puts it right in line with other pretty good keyboards, obviously. And then at that same price point, the fact that you're getting an amp, there's quite a bit of value with this one. Now I want to start with what's included in the box, because then I can get the box out of the way, frankly. Obviously it has, there's other plastic stuff that this comes with to kind of protect the keyboard, including that little dust cover. It comes with a USB A to C cable, not the longest cable, it's not coiled, and frankly, I'm not a huge fan of the cable. I think the only thing that would have made this an even better value or a steal is if it had some kind of nylon braided wire or something with a coil, because a lot of people in the enthusiast space kind of look for a more premium cable. The good thing is, because this is centered, you can pretty much, and it's USB-C, there's no weird detent in the port. You can buy any USB-C cable you want to plug it into any compatible device. So this will work out of the box, but when you're spending this much on a keyboard like that, I really wouldn't, I would consider upgrading. You also get a keycap and switch puller, because I am pleased to say this is a hot swap keyboard. I'm really excited about that because, again, at $150, it doesn't necessarily have to be when you consider everything else. I mentioned the cap and switch puller, and I want to use that real quick to show you the layout, because there's some pretty good things about the board. Now we'll talk about the keycaps or the actual layout and material choice here in a moment. This is going to be, I think, the biggest attractor or detractor for the board outside of everything else. So it's pretty easy. It's relatively straightforward to pop off a cap, and then you can see the yellow switch. Now these are Gateron Pro 3 yellow switches. They're still linear. They're very quiet, and I'll do the typing test soon. They're a little bit more firm than the red. Traditionally, I liked red linears the most because I'm used to that, especially for typing. They're very easy to depress and type quickly. The yellows are just a little bit more firm, and once you get used to it, you actually get less typos. So I'm really starting to like the yellows, I think, more now. So I'm kind of pleased to see that they switched to that. I actually did a couple builds, the Apos Audio exclusive Idabo 67 over there. I went with Gateron Yellows, the Milkies, but you know, still. So very easy to pull out. Now I pulled this because I wanted you to see the PCB. This is a 5 or 3 pin compatible switch mount, and then it has a north facing LED. So if you are switching to your own switch and you want to customize this board further, now you know what you can get. And then in addition to that, because they are north facing, I put this in upside down. Rookie mistake. Let's make sure I didn't bend any pins. So because this is a north facing LED, depending on what keycaps you get, if you ever switch down the road and the legends are on the top side of the switch, just keep in mind that will affect how bright the pass-through is for lighting. If you are concerned with RGB, this thing lit up is like a Christmas tree. In fact, instead of connecting a computer right here, I'll just show you some of the B-roll so you can see how nice this looks lit up. The illumination, because of this translucent smoky keycap design, it's more difficult to see the legends at night. Now I thought this would be more difficult in general, but during the day, if you have a more well-lit room or office, wherever you're using this, it's extremely easy to see the legends on this. It's very clear, and that smokiness really helps. It's only at night when you're at like full tilt brightness and everything's lit up. If you're not too familiar with the layout of your board, it might take you a couple extra seconds to make sure you're selecting the right character. Now, as far as the rest of the layout goes, because this is $150, I tempered my expectations on the keyboard typing side, because the DAC built into this to power your headphones, IEMs, whatever it may be, is closer to the K813, which I believe is like $70 or $80 by itself as far as raw amplification specs go. There's some different versatility with that particular unit, but the overall headphone and IEM performance is very similar to this. So I'm like, okay, it's probably going to be a pretty cheap board. Not the case, because the typing test, if you just hear how this sounds, it sounds awesome. Like, they really have it dialed in to still feel kind of crispy on the landing. It's not like a sponge, but it doesn't bottom out too hard either. There are multiple layers of foam inside. It's gasket mounted underneath. You have an aluminum top plate. It's actually an aluminum magnesium top plate. So it's actually really rigid. There's like no flex in the board. And I'm really shocked at the quality. Even the stabilizers, if you look at like the backspace and shift and space, listen to this. It's really not that bad. The volume knob is only available in this red color. It's a different placement. Usually you have a top mounted knob, but I think they might have gone with this to maintain a tighter profile. Otherwise it would have been more difficult to rotate here. So you can basically just use your index finger to roll it up and down, and pressing in will mute. I don't know if there'll ever be like swappable knobs down the road. This seems pretty secure, so I don't want to, break it trying to remove it. But overall, I had a pretty good experience. It adjusts very quickly, and this does adjust the Windows host volume. It does not adjust an internal amp DAC volume independently from your host. So if you're plugged into a Mac and you adjust this, you'll see the volume slider go up and down, and the same thing, of course, happens with Windows. Looking in on the top of the unit, you have that USB-C port that I mentioned earlier. That, of course, is going to handle all of what the board needs to operate. That includes illumination, the keystrokes, and the headphone amp DAC. It's all USB powered through a single jack. So again, the fact that they squeezed out 550 milliwatts of peak output was pretty impressive. And then you have USB 1 and USB 2 here. I am not a fan of this because the board, frankly, needs as much power as it can get. And I strongly suggest avoiding using these for anything that requires any real power to operate. You could plug in a slow USB 2.0 flash drive, for example, if you're just concerned with some, moderate file copies. Don't plug an external hard drive into this. Don't plug in a docking station that's going to power a headset to charge it. Things like that. It really doesn't have a lot of milliamps. So it just depends on your use case. Now, when you look in the bottom of the unit, you have a couple sets of feet. You have the high mount to put the keyboard at a more extreme angle if you like that kind of high profile on the back. If I put this down and switch to the small feet, which, by the way, on the feet, they also have rubber on them. A lot of keyboard manufacturers on the feet, especially in this price range, you don't get all the foam here, all the rubber on the side. So lower profile looks like that. So it just depends. I actually liked it on low or flat. I didn't really like the high profile too much. I thought it was too high. You have the labeling here. This is just a pattern design, nothing too fancy. But my favorite part about the keyboard, let's talk about it, the headphone amp. Now, FiiO uses dual Cirrus Logic 43131 chips to power your headphone or IEM. That's why I compared it to the K3, because it's very similar. They like using Cirrus Logic, and the new stuff is significantly better. These are not just to describe the sound profile, I'll just get right to the point. This is a very, very neutral sounding headphone amp, which is going to be a very overused term when you look at stuff like this. But that's really what you want in most cases, unless you have a very specific flavor of sound and you want something very warm or liquid sounding with tubes. Whatever you're looking to, target. This particular one, when I did a lot of A/B testing and C and D and E testing against a bunch of other headphone amps and DACs, it doesn't do anything extra to the bass. It's not sapping my bass performance either. I don't feel like I'm losing out on bass extension or depth. And if anything, the only thing that I notice is it's a little bit more energetic, or a little bit more bite and snap to it in the very high mid-range and treble region. It just seems just a tad more excited and sharp compared to something like my Topping A50 D50 Pro Stack that I recently got my hands on. Very similar sound profile to the K11, which I absolutely love. I think the K11 is just a little bit smoother. This is basically this on steroids. It has a little over twice the power and a slightly smoother sound profile. So if you're just looking for the FiiO sound, I strongly recommend this. I'll actually talk about this in another review later. USB optical coax, and then you can use this as a preamp output as well. And it has a a 1/4 inch and a 4.4 Pentagon for balanced output. So that one is a little bit more refined, but I'm talking like super critical listening. I tried a bunch of different headphones and IEMs, and one of them I'll be getting into in a moment here. But so when you look at the side, you have a 4.4 Pentagon and the 3.5. The balanced output, the 4.4, does have a little bit more power. Now I have a calibrated decibel meter, and I measured the volume output of the FiiO FT3, which is a 350 ohm dynamic driver, and then a much lower impedance FiiO FT5 planar magnetic driver. And I use both cables because these have a 3.5 millimeter termination. I plugged in each one through balanced and unbalanced. And then I measured the volume output at 50% volume. And on the Mac, if I set the volume to 15 out of 16 bars, almost max volume, I measured the output as there as well, which you're seeing the results of. Balanced is typically louder on products like this. It doesn't always mean it's going to be louder. It just depends on the topology of the amp DAC. But if you need a little bit more power and you find that the 3.5 isn't strong enough, you can always switch to balance. The FiiO FT3 is 350 ohm headphone. It takes a little bit more juice to drive. However, it's still fairly sensitive, and I could still get to uncomfortable levels once I hit 90 to 100% volume using the unbalanced. If I was in balanced, it was far above and beyond a comfortable listening limit for me because you're over 100 decibels, and that's hearing damage at that point. So power is not an issue. What I did run into an issue was when I tried these. These are an amp torture test, in my opinion, because the Moondrop Para, which is a $300 planar magnetic headphone, has only an 8 ohm impedance, like unheard of low impedance, while also requiring a decent amount of current to drive them. So whenever you have very low impedance, high current, that usually strains amplifiers the most. 350 ohms is actually much easier for the amp. It doesn't make it, just because something is louder or less loud doesn't mean it's easier or harder on the amplifier. It has to do with current, and higher impedance is going to help ease the load. When I passed 90% volume on an 8 ohm headphone and I turned it up, it would actually cause the keyboard to kind of reset. It would literally just pop off, the illumination would fail, and then it would reboot. That was what I was talking about earlier, where I think the USB is a little bit dependent on your source for power. So if you have a weaker USB hub or a very long cable, that's going to take away some of the power capability that the keyboard could require. Now, I didn't play around with like this lower RGB brightness, give me a little bit more overhead. Frankly, I don't like pushing this amp too hard, but on IEMs, they're all typically 16 to 32 ohms in that ballpark. A lot of IEMs are very easy to drive, but 16 ohm is up is what I would recommend for a keyboard like this. Now, there's also a couple gotchas with the KB3 that I hope will improve over time, but some of this stuff is good. So it supports the VIA firmware customizer on the web, which is a great utility. It does require that you install a special FiiO USB driver, which is also hard to find on the internet. I will have a link in the description below to take you to a Google Drive download. It's an unsigned driver, which I'm not a huge fan of, being in cybersecurity myself, because it hasn't received a certificate from Microsoft to be a valid signed executable, if you will. So it's kind of like a risky install, but that's the only way the VIA utility will detect the keyboard. And once you've installed the USB driver, which also includes the hi-fi driver, again, none of this is needed. It does work out of the box without using it. But once you have installed that, then you go to the VIA website, as you can see here. And when you go into the configurator, you have to enable the design tab, upload a JSON file, which I will also have in my description in order for the keyboard to be properly detected. Once you've uploaded the JSON file, then you can go ahead with customizing this keyboard. That does include shortcuts, it includes key bindings, and it includes RGB customization like speed, brightness, light patterns, etc. All of that stuff works eventually, but there are a lot of steps to make it work in the first place. There's also a firmware update that came out, I think it's 0.4 or 0.4. I don't know the exact number, but basically the install just doesn't work. It's saying like the keyboard's not detected and I don't have the right port on it. I've tried to disconnect all of my other USB devices, so it was just a keyboard and mouse. Tried several USB ports and it just never detects the board. So not sure what's going on with that. I couldn't update the firmware to the latest version to test. Maybe I already have it and that's just a bad error code. But apparently that update helps address pop sounds when the computer's coming out of standby, as well as other performance optimizations which weren't disclosed. So mine has worked well. Now the only thing that it didn't work well on, and this is why I didn't make too big of a fuss on this yet, is this 3.5mm jack is actually a combo port. It supports TRRS, which is a huge win for gamers who are also playing on this, and they don't just want the audio output. If you have a microphone like on a VZR Model 1 or an EPOS H6 Pro, for example, and you want to have an integrated amp in your keyboard, this should have been the best solution out there, frankly. It's pretty uncommon, right? Well, the microphone preamp on this is very weak, at least in my testing for my computer. I cranked it, and unless I'm talking very loudly, the microphone volume is quite soft. I tested on multiple headsets and the issue persisted, so I was hoping that by doing the firmware update it would fix that and maybe I'll get a stronger mic preamp. But again, my review sample at the time of this review with the current firmware I'm currently stuck with, the microphone preamp isn't good enough to be usable for me because I don't shout on my headset. I usually play at night. Now I think FiiO actually kind of hit a home run with this one because it works as an exceptional pre-built keyboard at 150. I mean, it goes toe to toe with some of the best boards in this price range, and I'm going to do more of a roundup later. Then you factor in the headphone amp DAC, which works extremely well. I never had issues with it. Again, keep in mind, because you're adjusting host volume, the first time you plug this in, don't have headphones plugged into it. Make sure that when you're connected to Windows, turn your volume down to like 20 or lower, for example, before you plug something in, just in case you don't want to damage your hearing or the wonderful collection you probably have. As far as like real music performance, I have no latency issues. It works great for gaming because there's no weird distortion. Again, I talked about latency, phase mismatch, none of that stuff. It's super tight, clean. And frankly, this is all most people need on a home audio solution, believe it or not. So especially if you have IEMs and especially if you have very efficient, easy to drive headphones, preferably at least 32 ohms, but you can get away with 16 ohm as well. And it's also exceptionally dark, which I did not expect because I was like, my biggest concern outside of the keyboard typing experience for the price was when you put an amp inside a board that has RGB and a lot of other things going on. I know it's LED, but still, anytime there's a lot of other electronics, that can introduce noise. So the most important thing they needed to address was filtering, because you don't want to adjust the volume and hear like a hissing sound or a hum or some kind of interference noise. Changing RGB flashing, whether you turn RGB on and off, does that affect your sound? And it did not. It was dead silent. So they did a really good job of isolating that amp DAC from the rest of the board. I don't know if it's on a physical design plus filters on the chip, but either way, it was pretty separate and you couldn't tell that you were listening to a keyboard DAC. And that about wraps up the review. It's pretty straightforward. It's a really good keyboard at 150 and it has an excellent audio solution just thrown in. So if you just look at it that way, it's actually a really good option to consider. And I can't recommend it enough. It's been great. One of my friends already picked one of these up because I called him to tell him about it. Especially if you're just an IEM listener and you don't need anything crazy. Having that freed up space on your desk is kind of nice too, to kind of clean up the aesthetics. So again, if you want to purchase this, I will have purchase links in the description below between AliExpress and APOS Audio and Amazon to help you find it. With that being said, thank you so much for watching this. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I'd love to see you at the next video, and I will see you next time. Bye.